on Mr. Media, I'll talk to Michael Molenda, editor of Guitar Player, and of a wonderful new compilation of interviews from the magazine, Guitar Heroes of the 70s. Stick around, but if this interview is rockin', don't come knockin'. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRMedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are more than 700 archived celebrity and pop culture interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by Audible. Audible is offering Mr. Media listeners a free audiobook download and a 14-day trial offer to give you a chance to check out their very cool service. I love listening to books on tape. If you've never tried it before, actors or sometimes the authors themselves read to you. It's great for the commute, the beach, or even unwinding before bed. You can choose a free audiobook from Audible's enormous library of titles, including today's top rock and roll-related bestsellers, such as Kiss and Make Up by Gene Simmons, The Man Called Cash by Steve Turner, or even one of my most recent favorites, Keith Richards' Life. You can even download Will Eisner, A Spirited Life, the biography of the comic book and graphic novel legend, which I wrote and will read to you personally. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of folks with more hair than musical talent in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. My daughter had a guitar, an acoustic, for several years, but the instrument never really captured her imagination. Not, that is, until a neighbor sold us her old electric. That guitar looked cool even when I held it, but in Rachel's hands, its capacity to astonish is infinite. There's just something awe-inspiring about an electric guitar under the command of someone who loves music and knows how to make a wood body and metal strings sing for its life. I think most rock fans will agree that the 1970s generation of guitarists were a special bunch. They studied those that came before them, adapted, imitated, and invented their own generational sound. And oh sure, some played solos that went on too long and were nothing more than egocentric stroking at times. But not the men, and Bonnie Raitt and June Millington, who were featured in a swell read called Guitar Players Presents, Guitar Heroes of the 70s. The book compiles legendary interviews with legendary players, including Jeff Beck, Jerry Garcia, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Roy Buchanan, Brian May, Carlos Santana, Frank Zappa, and many, many more. I invited Michael Molenda, editor of Guitar Player, and this sweet volume, to talk about the unique talents assembled in this book and how they stack up to the players of today. Michael, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hi, Bob. Thank you for having me and a million guitar players in your living room there or in your studio.
Pleasure to have you here. I got a real kick out of the book, and but I'm thinking, Michael, thousands of people play the guitar. What makes a select few into guitar heroes?
Sometimes I think they're just touched by angels or something. You know, you can have a whole bunch of people study the same scales and be inspired by the same other guitar players, and it's just a few rise to the top. Obviously, passion is a huge factor. You just have to love that guitar so much or love music so much that everything else kind of pales, which sometimes doesn't make you the best brother, son, daughter, wife, husband. But that all-encompassing desire to communicate through music is certainly a factor, and we certainly see that in a lot of the classic players that they were just obsessed with music, just totally obsessed.
And when you put together the interviews that made it into this book, how did you decide who to put in and who to leave out? I mean, it was quite a generation.
That's always tough, and you know going in that you're going to upset somebody. Matter of fact, one of the funny things was I asked Steve Lukather, who was in Toto in the 70s, if he'd write the foreword for the book, and this was at an early stage, and we were still I'm still kind of compiling some of the interviews, and he looked at the proposed table of contents and went, well, nice that I'm not included. So, of course, I kind of went, oops, yeah, I think we'll put you in there. But, I mean, there's some obvious people like I know. He still gives me a hard time about it to this day. There's some obvious people like Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, obviously, that really kind of defined the generation of what a classic rock guitar was. Of course, we didn't call it that back then. And then I wanted to look at some of the maybe less lauded players like June Millington, who were inspirational at that time, kind of pre-Runaways, to show that women, which seems funny these days, that actually women were devalued as guitar players. But back then in the 70s, I think it was kind of considered a boys' club. Mm-hmm. To a certain extent, it kind of still is considered a boys' club. So I think it was great to kind of look at someone like her and go, wow, she was completely killing it back then. I don't think many people know about her. Let's include her in this as well. And then, there's a couple of personal favorites thrown in, obviously, Nick Ronson, and and then there's just people you can't ignore, like I said, Santana and so on. So on one level, it was really easy. I think on the other level, though, as you said, there's so many that once you get past the kind of the gods, Clapton, Beck, Page, Hendrix, you're kind of like, slippery slope there because you're going to forget somebody.
And so what's the deal with Lukather, really? Was it you just couldn't forgive him for Toto?
No, I just think that was a brain-dead moment.
Well, there's a couple.
But he's an amazing player.
Oh, I know.
I think I kind of forgot that Toto was in the 70s. I think that was the problem.
If you would ask me, I would have guessed the 80s. Frankly,
okay. Well, then you and I would have been sitting in front of him together, embarrassed then.
Yeah. I did not. I guess that Hold the Line was, I guess, the late 70s, 78, 79.
He made it. He made it in there.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of people in here that you would have to have an appreciation, I think, of the 70s to know why they would be here. Because a couple of them, I'm afraid that time has not respected them as well. Maybe you may tell me I'm wrong because you're more into this than I. But I'm thinking guys like Leo Kottke, somebody else that came to mind a second ago, even Robert Fripp, Jose Feliciano. These are guys who you don't hear about them much these days. They're not. I don't think they're discussed as much. Are they in there because they were so recognized and so respected in their time, even if maybe they're not so much today? Or am I way off track here?
Well, you're not way off track. They still have careers. Obviously, they're still performing and they're still viable players. I think you're right. They've certainly dropped off the cultural landscape somewhat. But I mean, definitely, if you look at Robert Fripp with Frippertronics, tape loops, some of the music he was doing with King Crimson, which was fairly progressive and pretty heady. I mean, that was definitely an influence on tons of bands that preceded him. Leo Kottke, when he first dropped in, was a mind blower. His 12-string work, his finger-picking patterns, how he was approaching the instrument. And I think if you remember back that far, I mean, his first record was just all over college campuses. I mean, people were just eating that up at that time. Mm-hmm. And so, and who was the other person you mentioned?
I'm looking. Let's see, Fripp, Kottke. And Feliciano. Feliciano.
Again, maybe a little bit of a weirder pick there, but I think that because he was somebody who at the time was on TV a lot and was a pretty good concert performer and also just a burning guitar player, I felt that he brought kind of hot guitar into everyone's living rooms. It was a kind of a different way to do it, but from a cultural standpoint, I thought that he was important.
Feliciano, it's interesting. It was like you're reading my mind when you said he was on TV a lot. I was thinking, I remember watching him all the time. He would be on the Mike Douglas show or the Merv Griffin show. I'm showing my age here, but then again, in fairness, I mean, John Lennon was on the Mike Douglas show and was known to be a big fan of that show. So, I don't want to take anything away from Jose for that.
Well, and obviously, if you're a guitar player who supports guitar music or loves guitar music, you want to see guitar breaking into pop culture. You know, you want to see hot guitar players on shows that your mom's going to watch, or your brother and sister, or just normal everyday people. You know, you don't always want to just appeal to that strata of quote unquote musicians who are looking for perhaps looking for different things in music than normal everyday people. I mean, I've always, when you talk about obviously Page and Clapton and those cats, I mean, they weren't just playing for other musicians; they were also blowing the minds of the public. So, you know, Feliciano definitely kind of dropped into that kind of scene where it's like, wow, you know, this guy can really play, and he's on the Mike Douglas show.
Right, fair enough, absolutely fair enough. Now, what, if anything, do these guitarists in the book, any characteristics that they share, or is it too diverse a group to even say that?
Well, it's a pretty diverse group, but I think if you look past the post Summer of Love era and the era of excess and the drug and alcohol use that some of these names were enjoying, let's say, put that in quotes, all of them, despite that, were extreme students of the instrument. They were well aware of what came before them. They were well aware of the technology of the time. They were super into experimenting. And unlike, I'm showing my age now, unlike what I feel is one of the challenges of music today, is every single one of these guitar players wanted to be a distinct individualist. They did not want to sound like each other. They were using what they'd learned and their influences to try to craft a style that was distinctly their own. It's like the Les Paul thing, where you would go to players sometimes and say, "Hey, kid, you can play pretty fast, but can your mom recognize you on the radio?" and I think a lot of those players, although Les Paul probably maybe didn't say that to them, it took it to heart. You know, I want to be an individual. I want to be able to show that I, Eric Clapton, or I, Al Di Meola, or whatever, am an individual, unique talent.
And is that, I was going to ask you, I mean, the biggest difference between this group of 70s guitarists and, say, 20 or 30 from today, is there less focus today on standing out and being that unique? Or is it that much harder because so many great guitarists, so many unique players have come before them?
Well, yeah, that's... boy, I could get myself in trouble with this one. I think that I don't want to say that the 70s players had it easier, but definitely they were forging new territories with electricity and guitar effects and signal chains and all that. Also, whether they were looking at the blues or jazz, they had a little more, perhaps more unexplored territories there that they could add a rock thing and do these great hybridizations of rock, blues, jazz, Indian music, whatever. Here in 2011, music has kind of mined a lot of hybridizations, and certainly the DJ culture is borrowed from everything. So it's not as shocking or unique to hear someone playing, a Balian melody with an electric acoustic guitar, or find pop music that has psychedelic elements or urban elements or world beat elements. So I think it's more difficult for the musician today to kind of look at the culture and figure out, well, where do I fit in? Everything's kind of been done. And that's even down to what tone do I use. Technology has advanced so far that, where in the old days, most of us had to struggle with a horrible amp and a horrible guitar and kind of fight it to get a great tone. These days you can buy an effects process for under $100 that immediately makes you sound like Jimi Hendrix, at least from a tonal thing. So I think those are the challenges. It's everything's been homogenized to a certain extent. The good side of that is it's brought more people to play the guitar because it's a little bit less intense to get into it. You don't have to struggle with tone or technique so much to get started. But definitely, Well, also, I think from a cultural standpoint, I think the 70s was such a, everything was kind of blowing up right then. You had the 60s revolution, which was still being felt there. You had film rebelling against the studio system. Obviously, you had civil rights and all that. Now it's for better or worse, it's a calmer time. And when you look at the film community, sometimes you think there's more remakes of films going on than original films. And society itself is a little more into seeing things that are homogenous. Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't want to get in trouble. So you're a guitar player and you're trying to figure out, well, what do I do? I think a lot of times you say, I'm going to cop Steve Vai's thing, or I'm going to cop Joe Satriani's thing, or I'm going to cop the guy from the Killers thing, or I love the Foo Fighters, so I'm going to copy them. It's interesting being of a certain age and seeing younger bands sometimes not being so interested in being individual. So I hope that's not a rambling answer, but and I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying right now it doesn't seem like individuality or uniqueness is that highly prized by the culture. Therefore, it's not really a surprise to me that more guitarists aren't looking to be weird and unique, because they'll make themselves outsiders. They won't be able to get in the band. It's like, wow, you don't sound like the guy from Foo Fighters. You're out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and along that lines, is it easier or more competitive to be featured in Guitar Player these days, based on that description of the market?
Well, I think on one level it's easier because we're open to hearing anyone, whether it's someone from YouTube or someone sends us an MP3 and we can listen to it, whereas in the old days, pretty much if you weren't known, if you didn't have a record contract, the magazine might not have gotten to you. Now we just want to expose, well, I think for the reasons I talked about, we just want to expose our audience to players that we think that are really, really hot. You don't need to have a record contract or a major record contract. You just need to be out there in some way, which you could have thousands of hits on YouTube. And as long as we can point our readers to where you're at so they can experience what you're doing, it's fairly open. Now, from the stylistic side, it's very hard, because we don't want to be a history magazine where we're simply covering the guys that were hot in the 70s again and again and again, because
well, that would be Rolling Stone.
Well, maybe they know their audience. In a certain sense, we're also dealing with the cultural upheaval and how people want their media. Mm-hmm. Not many 20-year-olds read magazines, so I could choose to put, Rival Sons or some of these new bands on the cover, or some of the new hot metal bands. And we do from time to time, but am I alienating my audience, or am I teaching them? It's interesting. So, and although we're not just a print magazine, we're obviously on the web, and we have quite a pretty strong social networking community as well. It's a hard choice. Okay, let's see. Joe Satriani has an album out. Should we put him on the cover, or we also got this really hot, kind of unknown guy? Now, you make one decision, and your circulation department wants to storm in with machine guns and kill you. It's like, hey, thanks for taking our newsstand sales. And then on the other hand, you're fighting against the fact that, as you say, you don't want to be a history magazine. We don't want to be Rolling Stone. When you're a mature magazine, we've been around for 40 plus years, and you're constantly fighting that. All we care about is the past. So, right. So it's a battle.
Well, it's funny. I brought that up because I had not actually picked up Rolling Stone in a while. My wife actually brought home a copy of it a few days ago. And I looked at it, and I thought, man, is it 1984? Because, Steven Tyler is on the cover. The longest story inside is on Paul Simon. There's a story about Soundgarden getting back together again after, 15, 20 years. The lead review in the review section is the Beastie Boys. And there was one other thing, and Kevin Smith was the big movie story, and I thought, man, I must be Rip Van Winkle. I must have slept for 20 years, and it's just the next day, and I saw it. Wow. And I understand. Yeah, you're right. I mean, my daughter my teenage daughter doesn't have that much interest in reading magazines, unfortunately. Although I have bought her a few copies of a Guitar Player, I'll have you know. And
well, thanks for that.
Yeah, I can see the issue there. All right. Well, so I took us off in a different direction. Let's come back to the book. How do the interviews themselves hold up? I mean, you've been the editor at Guitar Player since I think 1998. Yes. You've had your hands on a lot of modern interviews, and now you've gone back and you've chosen the ones for this book. How do they hold up as in terms of editorial material?
Well, the interviews in the 70s tended to be really, really long, which is either good or bad depending on whether you're part of the short attention span community or not. I think that they were pretty in-depth in the 70s. Sometimes I think the editors today are better at getting to the meat of the matter a lot quicker. You know, how do you get your tone? What inspires you? How do you construct your solos or your songs? Then they tended to, they had more time, so it was more of a leisurely read, and you might talk about more cultural things than sometimes we put in the magazine these days. It was kind of the Wild West. They were kind of inventing it as they went along, because back then, Guitar Player was about the only magazine if you wanted to read about guitar players talking about guitar playing. Mm-hmm. And, I respect a lot of what happened back then. And sometimes, I have to admit, I do kind of roll my eyes and go, oh boy, we're going to talk about what it's like to wear platform shoes or something for 6 inches of type. But so we did excerpt some of the things to try to get to more of the, well, once again, kind of get to the meat of the matter. So I did leave in some of the rambling aspects too. I mean, June Millington, for example, amazing player, but also if you read that interview, it's totally in groovy 70s speak.
Yes.
and I think that you have to kind of leave it that way, because culturally, while part of me was snickering, I mean, you kind of get called back to what the slang was back then, which I think from a historical aspect is interesting as well.
Mm-hmm. No, that was interesting. And well, speaking of June, and let's maybe kind of wrap up here. If you were to grab the top interviews from the last 10 years, would there be more women, or would women still be a pretty small portion of those featured?
I think lead guitar playing still has testosterone overtones to it. I still get letters when we put a woman on the cover from some less than gracious men, let's say, who, how could you do this? Women suck, blah, blah, blah. Mm. So there's still a lot of those kind of attitudes going around. We certainly don't subscribe to them here, and we've certainly put our money where our mouth is by covering more women guitar players and putting more women guitar players on our cover than any magazine in any guitar magazine in the world. So we're definitely supportive. And I've had some amazing interviews with women players. Orianthi, who just was the last guitarist player with Michael Jackson. She's in her 20s, but incredibly wise beyond her years as far as playing music. You talk to the Bonnie Raitt and the Chrissy Hines, and they still have a lot of passion for what they do, and they are very articulate about how they craft their music and things like that. And even Allison Robertson of the Donnas, a band that some of our readers might feel is a little too poppy for them. Once again, just an absolute burning player who has a lot to say about not only what it means to use certain tools like amps and guitars, but also what it means to have to fight through the ongoing, slights of men, and as a woman playing rock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, women guitar players and women comedians do not get a lot of respect from men as a group, unfortunately. And you get a totally different view of those things when you have a daughter as opposed to a son. I think that's colored my view over the years.
Well, I think it's edifying even that. I mean, who do we have in the book? I mean, we have June, which is kind of a wild card, and then you have Bonnie, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't that we were trying to ignore women, or that there was just so many cool men to deal with that we said, let's just we'll do women in another book. It was just that there weren't really that many interviews back then. I mean, which is not to say that Guitar Player back in the 70s was sexist, because once again, I think they were doing more interviews with women even then than you would expect. But as far as rock heroes, and there were more jazzers, I think, and country musicians that they interviewed than kind of the rock scene.
Well, folks, listen, you can find Guitar Player Presents Guitar Heroes of the 70s in great bookstores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price at MrMedia.com, mrmedia.com. Michael, what is the, I think I know, but what is the website for Guitar Player?
That one's an easy one. It's www, maybe not so easy, .guitarplayer.com.
Very good. And are you guys on Twitter, Facebook? Where else can people find you?
Yeah, you can follow us on Twitter. We're Guitar Player Now. And Facebook, it's simply Guitar Player. And we put daily updates on both Twitter and Facebook. And sometimes we post things that aren't in the magazine. So it's kind of a cool way to get more data if you're crazy about guitar and guitarists.
Very good. Well, Michael Molenda, editor of Guitar Player and this very cool book, Guitar Heroes of the 70s. Thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
Thank you, Mr. Media.
A pleasure. And folks, for more original interviews with America's favorite guitarists and other musicians, surf over to our main website, MrMedia.com, mrmedia.com. If you've enjoyed today's show, subscribe for free to Mr. Media via email, RSS, or iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many parts of Madison Square Garden. And show your support for Mr. Media by supporting our sponsors, including Audible. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. We're also supported by thepartyauthority.us. Call DJ Ira for all your party entertainment needs nationwide at 1-800-DIAL-DJs, or visit their website, thepartyauthority.us. If you've got an idea for a guest, a comment on today's show, or would like to advertise on Mr. Media Radio, email me directly at bob@mrmedia.com. You can also follow Mr. Media on Facebook, Twitter, or our new YouTube video channel. Thanks so much for joining us today. Always appreciate you giving up a little piece of your day and spending it with us. Thanks for listening.